Hey guys, Dark Humility here. You can always catch me at twitch.tv/Dark Humility for 6 to 7 days a week of Diablo action. Here today we have an update to the Blight CE late game guide that I posted on YouTube about a week and a half ago. We have now hit level 100, so I felt like it'd probably be a good time to kind of show you guys what this build looks like in its final form. And so I was going to do a build showcase showing you guys my gear and my skills and my Paragon and aspects, and then of course we can do yet another demo here at level 100 just to let you guys know the highest nightmare dungeon tier she has completed is a tier 75 nightmare dungeon. I'll be posting that video as well on YouTube if you want to see that. It was pretty painful, but we did it. We got the achievement. Horrifying, one of the titles. Pretty awesome. So at any rate, this is a Blight Corpse Explosion, aka Black Hole, aka Brawler Necromancer. This is indeed a very fun build. If you want a new fun playstyle where you literally jump into the monsters and control them from inside the monsters and not from the outside, this build is an incredible time. If you guys don't know, on this build I am using Blight, Reap, Blood Mist, Corpse Explosion, Corpse Tendrils, and Bone Storm. If you want to swap out some different skills like Decrepify or want to rely more on Blood Mist, there are different builds that do that, such as the Infinimus Necromancer build, which is pretty awesome as well. But this build plays a little bit differently from most Necromancers you've seen, so of course we'll explore that here today. At any rate, just want to show you guys a final stat outlook here for the level 100 Necromancer. Pretty strong, right? Pretty strong. Some pretty insane stats. One thing that's important to keep in mind that even if you do reach 100% DR from the armor aspect plus your armor itself, that only applies to monsters that are the same level as you. So if you want to push those high level nightmare dungeons, you're going to want to have even more armor. But at any rate, so we use the armor aspect, life, cooldown reduction, total armor. Amazing stats. Res is kind of whatever. As of making this video, hopefully they buff it. Could be good. Damage, total armor, damage reduction, and maximum life. Almost on max rolls on every single stat. Pretty incredible armor here with a perfect Bone Storm barrier aspect. This is what makes you the singularity of the black hole. This is truly just part of it. Every single skill acts as a funnel to keep monsters getting damaged inside of a small area, and that is how this build functions. So that's what we're going to be doing there. Of course, we have the shadow damage, which is what truly makes it a black hole here, from Bone Storm being added and imprinted on this, and then 3 to 4 rings of blight, attack speed, critical strike chance, and just critical strike chance in general to help finish off injured enemies. Really good stuff in general. And then of course we have this incredible thing here. We have a different one as well to show off here with maximum life and different kinds of damage reductions. But as you can see, dodge chance against close enemies, damage reduction from close enemies, really good for that black hole effect here as well as that total armor increase, just giving you a ton of DR in general. But the damage reduction from enemies that are affected by shadow damage over time is also an incredible stat indeed. And of course there's all kinds of good stuff here. So we have this from our Paragon as well. So there's just a lot of damage reduction. It's really good to kind of spread out your damage reductions, like make sure you have different kinds of damage reductions everywhere. One thing that always scales, though, it seems, though, is just flat % damage reduction. It scales better than any other kind because it applies to everything. And of course, armor and total armor seem to scale a bit better. But if you want like specific kinds of damage reductions, make sure they're more targeted towards your playstyle maybe, or just make sure you have a little bit of everything, which is not bad. Since we go up close though, all this dodge chance isn't bad. Of course, you have the huge barrier on these pants as well. These ones have a bit of a better barrier as well. I believe we have another even better barrier just sitting around, not being used. I guess not in there. Must be in my stash. That's okay, but you can get it over 6,000, which is pretty cool. And then you can go rubies, you can go damage reduction from damage over time if you do a lot of poison damage dungeons. And so you can use those gems as well. But we're using rubies, which is pretty cool. I'd say those would probably be the best things you can do on this build. I don't think reducing the crowd control duration is all that helpful, because when you get chain stunned, you get chain stunned anyway. Rings of corpse tendrils, rings of corpse explosion. Very good stuff. Lowering that cooldown, increasing that damage. My corpse tendrils cooldown is literally 7 seconds, which means you can just spam it, which is kind of nuts. And then of course, you have the movement speed here, dodge chance, and you have dex. Dex is not bad. It helps out our Paragon boards, and it actually gives us some crit chance too. And the evade granting movement speed, you really need movement speed. As you can see, movement speed is a huge stat. As a matter of fact, if I could get movement speed on this as well, while it has all these other stats, I would also get movement speed on here. This one's like a pure damage amulet, same aspects though. Definitely gonna want those shadow blight aspects because they give you a ton of additional shadow damage. You know, somewhere between like 160 to 180 is gonna be really nice. This thing has the potential to stack up to even higher damage, which is why I have it, but a lot of people might prefer to put this aspect on the weapon and vice versa. This is the other Shadow Blight aspect that you have to actually find, which is cool. And so you can do that. And of course, critical strike damage to crowd control or vulnerable. Both probably the best idea on this character. They're not always perma-vulnerable though, whereas they're almost always perma-crowd controlled because you have a slow off of Blight. So I think this is maybe a little bit better, but it doesn't matter that much because it's the same percent, it's the same number. So using those sapphires, not bad. Damage to slowed enemies, damage to affected by shadow damage over time, damage to crowd controlled enemies. All very good stats. All stats pumping up our numbers so that we can get those crazy bonuses on our Paragon boards, and also just helps us out with every stat in general. I really like really high all stats. I think it's good. Crit strike damage though is something else you can also focus on, which is what this is. It's a little bit different. Sacrifice some of that extra shadow damage over time, but you do increase the size of your crits. The weapon itself doesn't do quite as much damage though, so it's very similar, but this is definitely another option that I've been using on this build. It does scale off of crit strike and crit damage. Yes, the Shadow Blight ticks do crit. Yes, the initial hit of the Corpse Explosions crit. Yes, the Blights crit. Corpse Tendrils crit. And yes, the Bone Storm crits. So crit is very good on this build. And of course, total armor, damage reduction, corpse skills. Really want those corpse skills. You can also get ranks of terror, as you can see here. You can get other types of damage reduction with corpse skills and terror. Terror is just really good. Just stacks up your shadow damage even higher in some ways. But then again, having all of this total armor and damage reduction is very good on a build where you literally jump into the middle of the monsters. You always get res on rings and amulet. That's just default. Don't need to worry about that too much. In general, the swords are good because it also gives you critical strike damage. You don't really get as much sustain as you might think from life per kill unless it's like really high, so I would just focus on getting as much damage as possible and use a two-handed sword. You can go safer, and if you want to play from afar and use a somewhat different approach, maybe not even use Blight, you could use other skills like Sever as well. You could use Decrepify, and then you can sit back and use something like a Scythe, which can help out with that as well. or you know, you just don't need as much armor, so maybe you can just get more damage from farther back and you can play back. This build doesn't have to jump in, but it's a lot easier, I think, to you get a lot more control of the monsters if you jump into the middle because of how the Blight imprint works, the void aspect here, pulling enemies in. Very good stuff indeed. Very good stuff indeed. But both Shadow Blight aspects that increase the damage, which stacks up via the amount of time that all of the shadow damage is ticking on top of the monsters. You get that, of course, from Blight, of course, itself, and you get it from Corpse Explosions. So overall, just really good stuff. Massive amounts of life, critical strike damage, massive amounts of life, damage to slowed enemies, damage to vulnerable enemies, critical strike chains, damage to affected by shadow damage over time enemies. These are all the stats you want. And of course, to make that crit strike chance insane with corpse tendrils, this aspect is indispensable. I like to put it on a ring. And then of course, having a 3 to 4 Ring of the Umbral aspect, really making sure you can sustain spamming that Blight. I have 4 versions of this aspect, but I just had this ring, and I got this ring towards the end of the 100 grind, so we're actually able to achieve the 3 with it, but that's okay. Ring of the Umbral is really super good. I mean, there's other things you can do too, but sustaining that Blight is really nice if you can. Definitely a lot of potential options though. Indeed, other things you can possibly use. Always good options, but I think in general these aspects are very solid for how this build plays. Of course, you can tell me in the comments below if you prefer something a little bit different, which is fine. Overall though, those are how this particular build plays. We have Bone Storm, Corpse Tendrils, Corpse Explosion, Blood Mist, Reap, and Blight. And Reap, guaranteed corpse attack speed if you kill the enemies quickly. You get DR automatically upon jumping into the middle of the monsters. It's actually pretty insane, and it works really well with this playstyle. And then of course you have your get out of jail free card. You don't really use Blood Mist for anything else on this particular approach. It's not like your main source of damage, but overall it's really solid no matter what. And of course it generates its own corpses, so when you can use it to generate corpses if you're having problems getting them, but Bone Storm can do that for you as well without much of a problem, to be perfectly honest. Alright. So, if we continue with that, that's pretty good stuff. Anyway, yeah, so let's quickly go over some of the skill stuff real quick here. So, let's go over just the standard skills. Standard skill tree, this is my final skill tree. Reap into Acolytes, Reap 1, max out Blight, Supernatural Blight. More damage. You could also, though, use Paranormal Normal Blight, which might be better if you plan to use it more from afar, which is not a bad idea. You can, of course, max out Hued Flesh. You need as many corpses as possible. Max out Corpse Explosion, Blighted Corpse Explosion. That is how you do the crazy amounts of shadow damage. Making sure you can regenerate your essence for spamming Blight and getting the monsters under control. Grim Harvest, generating essence is good. Fueled by Death, getting more damage after blowing up a corpse. Good. Since you mostly go into the monsters, and that's just how you play the build, close enemies take 6% more damage from you, and you deal 9% less damage to you. You go in, that's mostly what you want to do. If you played the build more from afar, you would use Death's Reach. Corpse Tendrils, I literally have 1 point into this, but it has 7 ranks. That's all the plus skills from the gear. That's how we get the crazy low cooldown here. And then, of course, the vulnerable from the Corpse Tendrils. You definitely want played Corpse Tendrils. 3 into Necrotic Carapace. This extra fortify does help you out with some overpower damage, and sometimes you can get fortified as a result of this. When you have minions, you get more corpses, so this is a bit more consistent. You could choose to swap out Necrotic Carapace for something else if you don't want to bother with fortify. Heck, you could even just put them into Death's Reach. So when you do distant damage, you can increase your damage. Of course, max out Terror and Gloom for the damage. Movement speed is really good on this character. And then, of course, the 1 second stun, which I think is bugged, but when they fix this on the patch, that will work just fine. You could totally ignore this currently if you want to, though, for the next week or whenever they fix it. And of course, you're not using any minions, so you definitely want to get that max standalone momentum worry. And Bone Storm. All of the extra DR, extra critical strike chance, once again stacking up that critical strike chance and critical strike damage. And then of course Shadow Blight, which is not optional in this build. That is how you're going to do a crazy amount of damage. Of course, one thing that is interesting is that you can see here the critical strike chance is 40%. That's pretty solid. But the damage of crit is almost 400%. What's interesting is you can make it even higher if you swap out to that critical strike damage sword. But it does, I think, do overall less damage in more situations, so I like to use my 115 item power sword. Either way, though, solid stuff. Book of the Dead. We sacrifice Reapers to do more shadow damage. Sacrifice Cold Mages to do more damage to vulnerable enemies. And we sacrifice our Golem for increased critical strike damage. You could, though, because of trying to spam Corpse Explosion, also sacrifice it for increased attack speed. You can kind of do either one. 10% increased attack speed, you can feel it somewhat, so I think sacrificing Bone or the Iron Golem here is pretty solid. And then, of course, Paragon. I'll kind of do like a brief overview of what you want to do here. In the starting board, you kind of want to hit all the... By the time you're level 100, I'd say you prioritize the damage nodes in the beginning and maybe armor, but damage, life, maximum life, damage nodes in general, you just kind of want to get all those damage nodes. And on the first board, I actually do control. Control is amazing because you have so much slow and stun from corpse tendrils and everything else. And the first board has a ton of intelligence, and if you upgrade your glyph to level 15, you get even more intelligence. You don't even need it level 15 though. You can get just barely enough intelligence points here to make sure you're getting that additional bonus, which is really cool. Of course, then we go into the Wither board. Wither is pretty insane. So your shadow damage over time effects will do bonus damage. Just makes you do more damage, and it's just pretty nasty in general. Gonna want life though. DR reduction from enemies that are affected by shadow damage over time. Pretty solid stuff. There's definitely points you maybe could even sacrifice to get this extra 2% I don't have there, but that's about it. You can see more damage to elites, shadow damage. This board just has everything. And then of course, if you have the shadow one, you get a ton of willpower on this board, which can make the darkness glyph really shine and help you do a ton of damage. Of course, then you go into the Flesh Eater board. After you blow up 5 corpses or consume them in any way, including corpse tendrils, of course, you also will gain even more damage for a large amount of time. So you can vortex enemies and pretty much destroy enemies of any strength and stack up your power. Of course, here I actually used Gravekeeper because you get increased damage just for having corpses near you, which is pretty cool stuff. Of course, this one also is powering up some very useful rare nodes, particularly the damage to elites. So I think that one's pretty nice. Also, you get enough dex to get that bonus. Make sure you get enough dex points. And then, of course, the last one's Scent of Death. At least 2 corpses nearby, you gain 15% damage reduction. And with no corpses nearby, you deal damage. So typically there are corpses nearby. And that means you're going to be getting that damage reduction. So this is actually, this board is actually a bit more defensive. And you'll see that here. There's definitely increases to critical strike damage. Increases to critical strike damage. Very good stuff, of course. Damage to healthy enemies, which is actually the only rare node you have anywhere. The rest are like to injured, so that's really nice. And then, of course, getting more armor, damage to injured enemies, always good stuff. Armor and intel, and exploit. So, on my final board, this is where I put exploit. A lot of people are using exploit on almost it. You know, any necromancer character, and it makes sense why. Because Corpse Tendrils easy vulnerable, either that or if you're using an Iron Golem, easy vulnerable. A ton of extra damage from this to vulnerable enemies. And of course there are some other options that can make you tankier. Definitely. These are the ones we're using, but there's a lot of possibilities for sure. Some minion based ones I leveled up here. But you can see here as well, you know, something like that would be great for Bone Spear, but yeah. Now this one's actually kind of cool because you can gain more damage reduction, so you could use Territorial for sure. And if you have no active minions, that actually works for me too, so you could also use Sacrificial. There's definitely a couple other different ways to build this out here. At any rate, that's pretty much it for going over all that stuff. Let's see. We went over the gear, went over the skill tree, the Book of the Dead, Paragon, even showed off some of my alternative gear. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So, real quick here, I'm actually going to make a Nightmare Dungeon, and then you'll be able to see it in action. Let's see if I can just do one that's kind of neutral. Doesn't really help me or hurt me. I'm actually not going to run a potion just so you can see how the build works, you know, without any potions. The way I was able to clear the tier 75 dungeon actually was I ran this potion and, you know, getting our armor, you know, really, really high. I think I was at near 9,000 there. I could get over 9,000 now with that, so... definitely pushing the limits of this approach here. Gotta be super tanky for high level nightmare dungeons because the monsters are so high level. Your armor gets penalized heavily, so you need as much defensive stats as possible. So Dark Ravine, I believe, is... Yep, it's up here. So let's do, I think this is a tier 58. We'll do a tier 58 in this demo. But keep in mind though, this character can do much higher. I would say tier 75 is like the absolute limit of this build before it gets frustrating or just like near impossible. So of course this character can pretty much do it all though. It's really good at boss killing as well. See, it does very well against single target. A lot of people ask me, does it really crap out on boss killing? No, you know, if you use Bone Storm, you get the corpses around it, start spamming Corpse Explosion, and then the boss gets wrecked. It maybe could even kill Uber Lilith if you can figure out how to dodge her attacks, which I'm pretty bad at. Some for one-shots are just very tough to dodge. One in particular is... But if you can do that, this build can do a lot of damage to Uber Lilith as well. But, I mean, Uber Lilith is kind of nasty. At any rate, boss killing, I wouldn't say is like the strongest component of this build, but it's very solid. Definitely not as slow as a lot of builds, and definitely faster than builds like Infinite Mist at killing single targets. So if you're having problems with single targets on other builds, this build can pretty much do it all. It's pretty well-rounded. It's a well-rounded build. Doesn't require any uniques, as you might notice from my loadout. Just aspects, and honestly, not even every aspect I would say is required. And you can even swap out some different ones. Of course, I'll be releasing the Endgame guide for the Blight CE Necromancer soon on Maxwell, so you can check that out. So typically what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to dash, reap, white, and then spam corpse explosion. And boom. Pretty good stuff, right? Now you'll notice that we have a ton of armor. The armor stacking aspect is insane. And if you see on that screen there, it's 11,200 when it's fully stacked currently. And that's without any potions, so it's pretty cool. Avoiding attacks is good, of course. If you have some really strong elites, that's when you should pop the Bone Storm, and then you will shred them. Keep in mind, these are really high level monsters here. $117, $112. This is an artillery shrine. Never need this though. I think in my tier 75, I didn't even get a shrine like this, like not even once. My tier 75 clear on this build, you didn't even get that. Notice that I can always pull in the monsters again with Blight. Reap, Corpse Explosion, and that Umbral aspect helps keep our essence up, so we can do that. One thing to note here is you don't even need Bone Storm. You can see we can crit a lot of damage. Monsters will eventually die from shadow damage over time if you leave them alone. I'm gonna get some extra defensive power. Honestly, Bone Storm is crazy for offensive power because of how fast it stacks up Shadow Blight with the Shadow aspect. I think it's the aspect of Ultimate Shadow or something. And that's what it's called. Yeah, there you go. And of course, look at that. Notice that if we use both Blight and Corpse Explosion together, you know, sometimes weaving them in between each other, they stack up Shadow Blight really, really fast. And of course can lead to really high damage really quick, even against single targets, which is definitely a weakness of a lot of other Shadow builds, for sure. Is that sometimes you can really only kill huge, dense packs of monsters with them. But with this character, we can do it all. Alright, so let's move on there. As you can see, ultra strong Animus carriers, even in a near tier 60 dungeon or nothing. Definitely not doing the very highest tier that it's capable of doing. Just to show you guys a clean clear. I would say it clears very comfortably up to like tier 60. And then I would say pretty comfortably up to like tier 65. And then it's possible to clear, you know, with better rolls on the dungeons. You know, the rolls are actually going to matter at that point. And with more optimal rolls like crit strike chance, you're doing like nightmare dungeons once again. Can do crit strike chance, but yeah, she's got big numbers. She hits hard. And you can see, you know, you don't even need level 100. You know, if you check out my previous video, I show her clearing a tier 50 dungeon at a much lower level. Against Suppressor, you might want to definitely consider getting as much damage as possible. Get that vulnerable stacked up on the monsters. Make sure to get that corpse tendrils up as often as possible when there's an open corpse and it's off cooldown. Notice how fast I can just respawn it though. And then I can pull it back in with Blight too to help manage it with the corpse tendrils. You just have a lot of control in this build. Always do a ton of damage to the monsters. But you can do even more damage, which is interesting. I mean, if you put on the, you know, I can put on the damage-focused amulet here. And then my damage, as you can see, can get even higher. Definitely can go more damage-focused. But now our armor is a bit lower. Lost some DR. Now we're going to take more damage, right? You know, for up to like tier 60, that's not really that big of a problem. Don't get hit by that lightning storm if you have that modifier. But yeah, increased critical strike chance, battle hardened. Those are great positive stats to have on Nightmare Dungeons. Hold Enchanted is kind of a nightmare. Drifting Shade can be really annoying. Things that like will attack you up close, like Storm's Bane's Wrath, can be annoying. Trying to see if we don't get one shot here. Yeah, look at all the defensive stats I invest in though. You really have to if you want to push high level dungeons. If you don't want to push this high, just invest more into the offensive stats, honestly. Solid stuff. But yeah, as you can see, Shadow Blight is critting. Lots of crits on this build. There's kind of a misconception that you only have to go like a shadow damage over time route. And you still get shadow damage over time, as you can see. I get a lot of shadow damage. See all those like white ticks that are like oftentimes getting like 100k plus. Yeah, I mean, some good stuff. Once the Shadow Blight ticks up, plenty of damage. I can just control them with Blight. If there aren't a lot of corpses on the ground, just use more Blight. Good stuff. And of course, if you're about to die, you can do that instead of popping a potion. I have to pop a lot of potions though. But look how comfortable this is though, and I even took off a lot of my DR just now. So you can see me taking more damage now, but yeah. One way or the other. 58. Pretty solid. Pro tip, by the way, make sure you definitely take out those damage reduction monsters. Definitely take out the damage reduction monsters before you kill the elites, otherwise they'll do no damage to them. See, I can control all the monsters. They do no damage to me. Blight is always available to knock the enemies into the center, which, you know, disables them from doing anything else. Reap is always giving us that DR and that free corpse. Definitely a different way to play a Necromancer, right? I mean, there's a lot of good ways to play a Necromancer, but I would say this one is definitely a solid approach. Oh, baby. Rage and Stone. Easy stuff. So yeah. Single targets, no problem. High density, no problem. Lot of control. It might not be currently the strongest build in the game, but with how strong it is though. Yeah, look how fast we destroy enemies with with Bone Storm. I use it frequently, but I wouldn't use it in easy scenarios. Make sure you're at least trying to kill elites with it. Oh, wow. Okay. I forgot this thing hits really hard, doesn't it? Might want to swap out for the DR amulet. Yeah. Level 112 monster, you know, it can definitely hurt a little bit. So one problem sometimes with bosses is they don't like to stand still, so you have to like regenerate corpses here and there. But overall, it's pretty solid though. There you go. Look at those big numbers there towards the end when we're doing damage to injured enemies, which is, I think, 35% of monster health. And then GG. It's pretty easy. I didn't even use Bone Storm there. Bone Storm makes bosses really easy. I actually wanted to show it without Bone Storm, just in case it was not just in case your Bone Storm is not up. And mine was not, so good way to kind of show that off there. But yeah, I mean, you can always generate more corpses, always more ways to do it. Getting that blight down on them is going to tick and going to generate corpses. If you're really having problems with generating corpses, Blood Mist can generate it as well with that modifier that generates corpses. And so yeah, lots of good ways to get more, of course, and lots of ways to handle those issues. But at any rate, Queen Xana is a beast. Once again, I would say it can clear up to level 75 Nightmare Dungeons if you get all the right defensive stats. Get really high defensive stats, and then you get all of those aspects. It can do very well. And it will absolutely crush. Go into the monsters, go brawling. Also going to be having a bad time once you start knocking them around and blowing them up. And of course, what better way to be? Singularity in the black hole with the Bone Storm. Anyways, pull the monsters in. There's like multiple ways to pull the monsters in. Blight and Corpse Tendrils. Multiple ways to deal with them. And of course, if you ever find yourself crowd controlled, get out with a quick Blood Mist and you're good to go. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this mini guide and demo for my level 100 Necromancer. Thought I would do a level 100 update so you guys can see what top level gear looks like and what you can expect on this really awesome and innovative build. And of course you can check out the written guide on Maxwell soon for the endgame. We already have the leveling one. If you want a solid leveling approach that uses minions that's super easy and fun, check that out at maxwell.gg as well, the Blight Corpse Explosion Necromancer leveling guide. And of course, check out the rest of the incredibly awesome guides on Maxwell as well. And let me know what you guys think in the comments below here about this build. Of course, I will also give you guys timestamps so you can refer to any part of this guide. And so, of course, you can do everything yourself. And have an awesome time, guys. Let's smash it. Dark Humility over and out. Let's get it.